Welcome to episode 205 of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. I am Dave Deacon, and have we got an episode for you? We talk wheat, of course. That's what most everyone in the ag world is talking about this time of year, with Oklahoma State University Extension small grain specialist, Dr. Amanda Silva. We will be covering a lot of interesting stuff in this episode, including the results of field trials from across the state. And you will be able to find that information and everything else she talks about on our website, reddirtagronomy.com. As always, we start with a quick trip around the table for an introduction to the dream team of dirt and everything that grows from it. Let's start with Oklahoma State University's Extension Soil and Water Conservation Management Extension Specialist and holder of the longest title on the podcast.
I've been so happy that it's raining on my irrigated ground in the Panhandle, and I'm still, I've got cotton out there, and I don't think we'll have to turn the water on until so July, especially if it keeps raining, and it's humid, and it's not really been that hot, which is not necessarily good for cotton, but at the same time, the plants aren't just beat to crap.
Dr. Jason Warren. And across from him, we find Oklahoma State University's Extension Cropping System Specialist.
If we end up getting a nice bump in those wheat yields or even late season hay tonnage, do you think that was a contributing factor? We didn't see that cattle on those wheat until, pre-joint like we would normally see. Some of them pulled it off in the fall, to where they just got fall grazing and then really didn't graze anything. Do you think that's part of a contributing factor, what we might see some benefits to?
Dr. Josh Lofton. At the time of this recording on June 7th, Dr. Brian Ernell was at OSU's research station in Chickasha harvesting his wheat plots, so he wasn't able to join us for this episode. Now, the doctors really do enjoy hearing from you and answering your questions, so if you have one about soil or crop production, jump over to reddirtagronomy.com and leave your question there. Or send us an email directly, podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, and we will discuss your question on the next podcast. Matthew, we did get your question, and we are working to get the right person on in a future podcast to answer it for you. Also, a new feature, if you want to watch the podcast live as we record it, jump over to our Facebook page. We actually live streamed this episode as we recorded it. It's kind of a sneak peek behind the curtain to see how the show is actually produced. Look for the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast page on Facebook and watch for live event notifications so you can watch live as we record the next episode of the podcast. You can even comment in real time and the doctors can answer your questions live. So let's kick things off with an update on what the recent rainfalls have meant to the soil and everything that grows from it with Dr. Jason Warren. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. So, Jason, overall, we've had a little bit of rain in the state.
Yeah,
things are looking better. Things don't look so dire, I guess. There for a while, it did kind of look serious as far as soil moisture goes, but we're past that, maybe?
In the eastern half the western half of the state, we're in really good shape. In April, it did not look good.
Right.
There were guys that were, farmers that were able to get some corn in the ground off some little rains. And at that point, I was like, dude, we're going to have some rain because we can get it out of the ground, but it's only got a foot or so of moisture underneath it, which means it's got 2 or 3 inches. And now a lot of these places, it's like the world has been turned upside down, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because, out in the Panhandle, there's guys that have had 10 inches of rain in the last 14 days.
Yeah. And
you add the last 30 days, and that's a pretty easy guess for most guys. And so now they're set up to grow a crop, and all they need is average. You got 10 inches in the ground, and then you really just need an average rainfall year to get an average yield. And if you luck out and have a little cool weather and some above average rain, then you could really do pretty well. That's what was making me nervous, is not just getting it out of the ground, but not having any profile. And now we're back to having a profile. You look at like Lugard Altus, I was looking at that data the other day, and now they've got some base flow, it looks like, and that means that the landscape is full of water.
Right.
And now it's releasing it into that river. And I think if you looked at a lot of the river flows, you'd start seeing that. And that's indicative of where we need to be in the spring. We should really need to be there a month ago.
Right.
But at least we're there.
So it was quite interesting. Whenever you were in my office earlier, you were talking about that base flow. So can you give a little more detail of what that base flow was? Because the way you said it to where, flow when there's rainfall is natural, but flow when there's not rainfall is kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not a hydrologist. I just look at this stuff and think about it in the context of what I know. And what you see as you go from the winter time, moving into the spring on any type of year, that's our wet season downstate. And then we got a little bit of a wet season in the fall. But the fall is a little different because you've been sucking moisture out of the ground all summer.
Right.
And in the spring, those rainfalls are very effective at recharging the system because you don't have full-grown plants out there pulling hard at full ET in August. And so you want that first big rain in the spring, it's going to soak in. And then the next one may not soak in quite as fast because it's hitting more moist soil. And every time it rains, you'll get some runoff depending on the moisture condition and intensity of the rainfall, and that runoff will go to your streams, and you'll see a spike in the flow of the river. And then as the soil system within that basin starts to fill up, you'll not only get surface runoff, but then you'll get drainage underneath, and if it gets in contact with the alluvial aquifer that's associated with that, you connect everything from top to bottom down to the alluvial aquifer, then you can start to get a little improvement in the base flow. And I just said that because it's indicative of the landscape being full of water. And to kind of tie back into that, and I don't want to get too off topic, but I've been looking at some like CO2 numbers off some field experiments where we're measuring CO2 and nitrous oxide and stuff. And it's fascinating because like last year, our primary productivity, or essentially the photosynthesis that's going on, it wasn't really pulling that carbon number down, or the CO2 number in the atmosphere. And now I'm seeing numbers that are like below 400, and last year they'd been like 500. And so that means that our ecosystem, at least at Fort Cobb and in Covington where we're collecting this data, is really pulling carbon out of the atmosphere because everything's happy and green and lush. And then, you can look at does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you can see all, like, I don't know, I'm kind of goofy, but it's fun to see because after going through, 2 years worth of drought, and last year was as bad as I can ever, it was worse than 12. I don't know what the weatherman or the weather history would tell you as far as the intensity of the drought, but I think we were better prepared for it.
Yeah.
And people made smarter decisions on the whole, especially the guys with cattle, pulling cattle off and destocking. But it just seemed brutal. And and now we're growing stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and as I'm looking at the mesonet right now, we're recording this on June 7th, and Ava has had 7.46 inches of rain in the last 30 days.
Yeah.
And, here in Stillwater, we've had 4.65, Idabel, 1.1 inches in the last 30 days. And
that's what I'm saying. It's like the world is upside down.
yeah.
You look at the 14-day accumulated rainfall, and Miami, Oklahoma has had 0 rain.
Right.
And Boise City has had, 7 inches, 5 inches?
Boise City's had 4.84 inches of rain. Looks like Hooker's had 5.66 in the past 14 days.
That's
Yeah.
you got to start. You got to start thinking about them guys out in eastern Oklahoma because their soils aren't built for that.
Right.
And we talked about that a lot last year because even though they were not as dry as the folks out west, those soils, those heavy clay soils, limestone-based soils, just aren't meant to take these long, prolonged dry periods because the way they dry and the way water fits around the soil particles and stuff like that. So even a less of a dry period, it seems to hurt the crops a lot more back east than sometimes it does out west. Well, and there's differences in crops and management and all that goes into a lot of that. But
yeah, The eastern half of the state and the soils. Now you can get down in river bottoms, and this is not necessarily true, but in the most part, those soil systems are not as resilient to short-range drought.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we can get a crop out of the ground and get some roots established in the panhandle, then that soil can hold so much water that it can utilize and keep things going between the rainfall events. But, you know, some of the soils over around Miami I'm familiar with, they just don't have the rooting depth or the effective rooting depth that can develop in that environment as much as you can find out west. And so they're very susceptible to short-term or you know, like 2-week droughts.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting that, like you said, everything's turned upside down, because 2 months ago we were talking about the East getting all the rain, and the West wouldn't get any. And then, like you said, it's just flipped around.
Yeah, maybe it'll flip around for a week or two for them.
Right.
I don't want it to completely flip, though. I hope everybody keeps getting rain, because we're set up pretty good in the western half, and so if we can keep getting fed a little rain from time to time, then we'll be in good shape.
Well, like you talked about, you know, with sucking all the CO2 out of the atmosphere, you know, we've seen corn in the ground that's been in the ground for a month or so, really was plodding along until the last like 10 days, and it's really hooked up on itself. And I mean, there's a lot of things, especially the corn and sorghum, that, you know, able to function at those lower temperatures, you know, has really just hooked on and gotten after it with these warmer days, and now the rain underneath it.
Yeah, and see, that may be some, and I don't want to get into that too much, but it's really cool because these, you know, we're measuring this stuff to assess, you know, greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture, but then it's fun to watch that CO2 number because we are measuring it in a cornfield, and as that corn goes to canopy, and we've had fairly calm winds, and that plays into what I'm seeing is that when the wind is calm and you go out there and take these gas samples, then that canopy is pulling CO2 out of, you know, its atmosphere and not so much interacting with the overall atmosphere, but you can actually see that corn breathe by sucking that CO2 down. And then if you go out there in the afternoon, in drought conditions, if the stomata are closed, then you won't see that. You actually see an elevated CO2 number because the soil's respiring and generating CO2, and the plants are, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's cool to watch, and you can see it at least. And I haven't seen it in Oklahoma for a while, and it's partly because the wind blows through the canopy and kind of messes stuff up, but it's kind of cool.
Well, and that's one thing I've noticed just being out at the farm is we don't have the sweeping winds that we've had, and it's just been, you know, a muggy rainstorm. And again, this is, you know, around central Oklahoma, but we haven't had the steady 20-mile-an-hour winds that people come to Oklahoma to experience. And, you know, it just in the past couple of weeks, it's just been the muggy, you know, no wind, a lot of rain situation. Are you saying that you may be able to see that in the corn plants now?
Well, they're just happier. I mean, you have 20-mile-an-hour wind. It's brutal.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, you have an atmospheric condition that's like low humidity, and then you add high wind to that. It's freaking brutal on a plant. Yeah. So you have the soil water condition, but then the atmospheric conditions affect how much water is getting pulled out of that system. And so we're fairly in decent shape. I need to start. I've been so happy that it's raining on my irrigated ground in the panhandle, and I'm still, like, I've got cotton out there, and I don't think we'll have to turn the water on until square, you know, so July. Wow. And especially if it keeps raining, and it's humid, and it's not really been that hot, which is not necessarily good for cotton. But at the same time, the plants aren't just beat to crap. Right. Now, my student went out there last week, and she said there is some damage of some sort, and I'm not sure that it's wind. I'd have to look at the wind, like historic wind the last 2 weeks. But like last year and the year before, the wind was brutal. Yeah. And it's just brutal.
Well, and I think that's one thing that it's least helped us. You know, last week we were over in the eastern part planting beans and stuff like that. And like you said, it hadn't really rained in 2 weeks, but just under the surface, you know, half-inch deep, there's still good moisture, and it's because it's hot and it's humid and not a whole lot of wind, and so the surface might dry out a little bit and bake out, but there's still moisture down there.
Yeah.
And we're being able to keep that and recover it a little bit longer than we would. And Dave, I don't know anybody that we might have to call Oklahoma tourism. I don't think that's on their pamphlet is 20+ mile an hour constant winds.
Oh, it's not?
No.
Oh, I thought that's
not on a marketing pitch anywhere.
Well, hold on. So Amanda, you're not from Oklahoma. Whenever they told you about Oklahoma, was that part of the spiel? Come to Oklahoma where there's a constant wind and you'll love it. We'll always have weather for a kite. I mean, is that
well,
part
it's
of?
in the song. The winds come sweeping down the plains.
Right.
Yeah, I get the song.
Did you know what that meant?
I guess I learned here.
She does now.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Amanda Silva with Oklahoma State University. Your focus is more of the small grains, the wheat crop, and what has the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks meant for the Oklahoma wheat crop with all the moisture?
Well, it's almost like too late because now we are trying to cut, and there are a lot of cases that the wheat's ready but the ground's not.
Yeah.
So here I am hearing you talking about the rain and all that. We missed that. Yeah, we really missed that earlier in the season.
Yeah.
So, but it came in a time where we had some good stand that it helped. It helped with grain filling. But in some cases now, especially places where we cut already, southwest Oklahoma, where the wheat was already matured and the ground was too wet, we are seeing some impact on test weight.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It was dropping.
Yeah, it's dropping.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit behind. In some places that we are ready to cut. Wheat's ready, but then we have to wait a little bit on the ground, and then every day we have a little bit of a forecast that we cannot make plans. Also, so it makes it hard to.
Didn't that happen 3-4 years ago? Because I remember in northwest Oklahoma, we were trying to do a story about the wheat crop, and we had planned on going out there to go shoot the story, and then it rained, and then he couldn't move this multi-ton combine through the wheat field because he was going to get it stuck, and so it was just stop and go with the wheat crop.
Yeah, but. Well, today we are cutting chica so that's good. But we are waiting on the other places to see if we are gonna get rain or not, and if we can go tomorrow, if we can keep going or not. So it's being a little bit slow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When would have been a better time to have this 3 weeks of soaking rain?
So would say during the what we call critical period. So anywhere where the wheat's forming, wheat heads, grains per head. So from jointing to flowering would be a very good time to get rain. So that's when the crop is developing, is coming out of dormancy and using a lot of water, nutrients. So we missed that in some places, most of places, I guess. And and in some other places that we didn't even have a stand, like the Panhandle.
Wow.
But Balco we did, and the plots looked really good when I was there. End of May.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's upside down, like you're saying. Our southern plots looked better than the north central plots just because of the rain pattern. A little bit more moisture, just a little bit. That made a lot of difference.
Yeah, because it started raining down southwest Oklahoma a little bit early, maybe.
Yeah, they got some scattered.
Yeah. And it was spotty, I suppose.
Yeah, that we didn't.
Because what kind of yields are they getting down there?
I think it was around 50s, 40s.
That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
At $7-8 or whatever.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited to see the yields at Chickasha from what I've seen, the plots now that Tyler was showing me.
Yeah.
That they're cutting, so it looks really good.
Nice.
So, and another thing is that with those late rains, we also had some disease that came in very late. So we didn't manage for it in a lot of cases. Well, in Chickasha we did, just because that's what we do. We follow a methodology there. So we have standard management and intensive management where we apply fungicide. And we had some leaf rust showing up later. some septoria showing up with all that rain, and I think we may see an impact on that too.
When you drive around, do you see a lot of these fields that tillered out, like where they pretty much was close to dead in spots, and then they've tillered out, and so they're still green
Yes.
in spots, and then there's areas that look like it's near mature? Well, what's the deal on that? What do you think? Like the potential of those green spots are to make
Yeah,
green?
well, in some cases, what we were seeing in our trials is that the secondary tillers, the head size is almost the same as the main tillers.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of impressive. Yeah, we were having trouble actually making our sampling collection just because now we have a lot of secondary tillers and they're delaying sampling. But in general, I wouldn't think those secondary tillers would contribute much
Yeah.
to yield.
But you've got plots that's a condition. You
Yeah.
just got to wait until they're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Well, so we had that problem in sorghum a couple years ago. We were out at Homestead, and the main tiller didn't do a whole lot. We had or the main stem though. We had a lot of tillers. Ended up bigger, the same head size as the main stem. We ended up having to just wait on those. So those growers that have that out in the field, your recommendation, just hold off. Go like what?
I think it depends on the proportion,
Yeah.
right, of those secondary tillers. Like in some cases here where the proportion of green heads are really high, we are waiting. In some other cases, then if it's just one here and there, then I wouldn't. But yeah, it's kind of...
Well, and I know we've talked about it because, some of the stuff, that have been relatively dry, low test weights and also some shrunken seeds. So even if the head sizes are the same, maybe the quality or, test weight and all those other things could be a lot better on the secondary tillers that are coming around. You just never know.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah. So I guess your answer to that is it depends.
Yeah. But I didn't say it.
The old extension answer there. Well done. Well done. So going back a few weeks, maybe a month, you did the wheat tours across the state. Was there a variety that stood out in different places? And if so, why maybe that one may have done better this year than maybe a previous year?
I guess I wouldn't say one variety, a
Right.
specific name or anything like that, but things that I've noticed is that some varieties, they were able to bounce back from the drought better than others. So some, they were suffering from the drought and they continued that path and never responded to that moisture, but some seemed like it did. Yeah. That's kind of was surprising seeing that. But in general, I think if the drought was so severe the way it was, and if it continued to be that way, it would be very hard to see variety differences. So
Yeah.
I think the main differences that we saw, it was just the ability of the varieties to bounce back from the drought. Yeah.
Are you expecting it? And I know that you're still collecting data. I mean, you're in the middle of a data wave right now.
Yeah.
Are you expecting higher proteins in some of maybe different parts of the state due to the lack of rainfall and just the overall weather?
Yeah, we see that sometimes very often when we have lower yields, then we see higher protein just because it's less diluted
Right.
in that grain dry matter. But yeah, I expect to see that. We are seeing very high protein at Altus that we are going to rerun with a different method.
Wow.
Yeah, just to make sure the analysis is collecting what actually is, just because we do like a near infrared analysis, and so we are going to use like a wet chemistry analysis to make sure that protein,
So that must be really high.
it's very high.
Like
Average 18%, so it very high.
Wow.
Unbelievably high.
Yeah, it's unbelievably. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's too high, and my fear with that is that the equipment is not really calibrated for that high of a value, and then maybe it's inflating too much. So we'll run it at Swaffle and see what says. But in other cases, we can see like I always see every year. So some varieties, even with high yields, they will tend to have higher protein.
Right.
So that's something that we can see their genetics in that. But then things like the environment will impact. So there is still a negative relationship between yield and protein. But we can clearly see that some varieties, year after year, they will tend to have better protein than others at similar yield levels. Similar and high yield levels.
Have you visited with the guys up at Kansas? I mean, are they kind of in the same boat as far as the rainfall patterns hitting their wheat crop, or did it hit them earlier relative to the or like the growth stage of the crop?
I think it was very similar, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I guess I haven't followed that.
I just wondered
the phenology very close.
I just wondered about like the general condition of the wheat belt. Wheat crop.
No, it's
about like ours.
Yeah, it's not the best.
No,
everywhere. Yeah.
Well, like in western, like the Panhandle.
Mm-hmm.
At our research stations, they planted wheat, and it came up. I don't know when did it start raining. The 1st of May. It emerged the 1st of May.
Yeah, we planted.
Most of the Panhandle west of there.
Well, we had some there that never came up.
Yeah.
That we had to abandon, unfortunately, and then some that we were doing some testing there for late planting. So we planted in October, then we came back and planted in November, which is late for the Panhandle.
Yeah.
They all came up by February or something.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Well, at least that was the time where we could kind of row it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where have you seen your highest yield so far in just in the data that you've collected so far?
So we haven't harvested many locations. So we did Altus, Walters, and Chickasha today.
Okay.
And from the little bit that I saw from the combine that Tyler was showing me, it seems like Chickasha might be a very good one, which is very surprising.
Yeah.
I didn't think that when we were there at the plot tour. So Altus was looking really good when we were there. So, which having 40, 50 bushel there is also very good considering the conditions.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
And amazing protein.
Yeah, that's too much.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Hopefully this week we can cut more locations. So we're hoping El Reno, where we have that dual purpose comparison with grain only and Apache. So have a better picture of it. Right.
What has been the questions you've been getting this year from the producers across the state?
Well, the first thing that everybody has in mind is that drought tolerance on varieties, but that's what I say, when a drought is so severe like that, it's very hard for even a variety with a drought tolerance to handle. But since we got some rain later on, now they will see that on the yield results. So they will be able to compare varieties about that with that drought tolerance, or at least with the ability to respond after being under drought. Questions we get, it's grazing, so everybody's interested in that. There are a lot of things involved, so it's not only fall forage production. So one thing that we like to mention to them is the ability of the varieties to recover from grazing. So we have a lot of varieties that produce a lot of forage in the fall, but you put cattle on it and they struggle to come back up. And that's what we see too. So that's especially important for those trials where we have dual purpose, that they can see that. Unfortunately, this year we will not have data from our dual purpose plots at Walters, so we didn't have any forage there. So it's just going to be grain only there. Yeah.
I forgot this was the first year in a long time he didn't put out.
I think like in 30 years he said that he didn't graze it.
Wow.
He didn't have the cattle there. Yeah.
Yeah, and where my farm is, the guy across the road, wheat crop looks amazing. The guy down the road, he left his cattle on and just grazed out the wheat, and then the guy across the road from him hated it. So I mean, it's just it's like the Bermuda Triangle of wheat. I mean, we have all three.
Yeah, that defines Oklahoma, I think.
It really
year.
does.
It's all over. Yeah, we have all kinds.
Well, so let me ask you a question on those lines. Very theoretical, because there's not, I mean, who knows what the right answer is, but we had a lot of folks pull off their cattle relatively early on wheat, or maybe never grazed it.
Mm-hmm.
If we end up getting a nice bump in those wheat yields, or even late season hay tonnage, do you think that was a contributing factor? We didn't see that cattle on those wheat until pre-joint like we would normally see. Some of them pulled it off in the fall, to where they just got fall grazing and then really didn't graze anything. Do you think that's part of a contributing factor, what we might see some benefits to? Because
you mean not grazing in February?
Yeah, when we didn't have, a marginal dry period or a very dry period, you just didn't have those cattle, so the wheat was able to kind of recuperate.
Mm-hmm.
And
it could be
maybe something to learn going forward on those marginal dry years, that you have to start weighing those options on grazing versus we did it out of necessity this year, because I think a lot of folks would rather graze because the hay levels are so low. But in a year to where we have an abundance of hay potentially, maybe it's something we can learn from a wheat perspective, of especially in those marginal years. Because I mean, there's some folks that I think were about to give up on the wheat, and you go around on Twitter and look at their hay, and those windrows from the hay are massive.
Yeah.
They just got a ton of hay that they're going to probably love come July, when they're really going to need it. And I mean, there was a lot of folks that were giving up on oats a month after they planted, and we've heard some really astounding oat hay tonnage. So, and I mean, we had great oat that I never thought when we planted that it was going to make, but the rains just came at the right time for some of those that were a little bit later, and all that.
Grazing intensity is extremely important, especially when we are under drought, because like I said, there is a genetic component on the ability of the varieties to recover, but moisture conditions is number one. So if you graze it too hard, it's
hard to replicate in your stuff to really give an answer to that. I mean,
yes, it is.
I mean, that's almost an impossible task to ask those kind of things.
Yeah.
So anyway,
whenever it comes to, and this is a Brian Arnell question, so I think the brain trust here between the three of you guys can.
Did he write in?
Yes. Brian A from Chickasha is wanting to know, overall, whenever it came down in years past, it's come down to, do I do a nitrogen application? Do I go ahead and trust the strip? I mean, do I put forth the money to do it? Was this year a good year to go ahead and jump on that? And I mean, whenever looking at where we are now, were there benefits to making the application, to making the commitment to the crop?
Oh, it's so hard, I think.
It is,
to know. Yeah. And we get questions about it all the time when we are in situations like that. And I don't know, because the crop didn't use the residue that we had last year. Mm-hmm. So in several fields we had a lot of residue still, but in some cases we didn't. So I think it would have been a good idea, and I think we are seeing that in some of our trials. So we saw a nitrogen response. So I think it depends on the field. It depends what is the residual. So I think that's why it's important for them to know what they have out there, what they had out there, and I think I would trust the strip.
Yeah.
But
Jason, you look like you're warming up for a great answer.
You go, Jason.
Well, and it's hard to do, because it's hard to spend money on something that might fail. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, if I recall the data that Arnold has shown, is your responsiveness to nitrogen is not necessarily proportional to the yield. You could have a low yielding year that responds to nitrogen, and I think it goes back to what Amanda said, is what kind of residual you have, what kind of microbial decomposition you have of the organic matter to release the nitrogen during the growing period where it needs it. and those things are highly uncertain. That's what's so handy about having a nitrogen-rich strip. If you can handle the management that goes along with it, it can provide you some more knowledge versus just going out there and doing your standard rates.
Yeah, we were in that same situation in the plot that we were like that. It was Balco.
Mm-hmm.
So based on the information we had, we're like, maybe we can put a little bit more, but with that drought we had, you know, if I was a producer, I would have not.
Yeah.
But since we were doing research, I said, okay, let's go ahead and do it. Now I think we'll see a response to that.
It looks better than the bulk of the field. It's just greener.
Yeah, it did.
Well, and that's real common.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is.
Yeah. It's very difficult, and like I said, if I was a farmer, I would have not done it.
Yeah.
But since we have just a small, small area, and we can kill that curiosity, that's what we did.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, I guess, does green equal grain? If visually you say, hey, I went ahead, I committed to the nitrogen, it's green, am I going to see a benefit from that greenness? Does green equal grain in that situation?
I don't know if it's a very direct proportion. I think it would be better to say not green.
No grain.
No grain, yeah. But then it's hard for us to see how much of that green would be actually influencing or giving yield.
Well, because last year Brian said that he had enriched strips that underperformed the bulk of the field last year. And that's because that nitrogen stimulated more growth, vegetative growth that used more water, and then it ran out of gas and died.
Especially when you do early season, that's what he's been saying. It was the early season application, it's not a good idea.
Yeah,
because you do promote a lot of vegetative growth, and like Jason was saying, using a lot of water, and we don't get water. And,
Whereas this year it's the opposite. We didn't have any water to get it going, and then deluge.
Mm-hmm.
So with that deluge, it's really helping the summer crops, the cover crops, the everything else crops.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing, kind of like what Jason was talking about earlier, the one thing right now is some of our crops, specifically cotton. We are in dire need of this heat. We're finally getting around to.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the Panhandle, where they've gotten a lot of the moisture and all that, I mean, they were like mid 70s yesterday, and down in the 40s and the 50s at night. I mean, that's, where you have everything else kind of clicking for you. You kind of need the heat to come around. And the sun. We talk about how when we grow summer crops, we're harvesting sunlight. That's what we're doing. And when we have these long cloudy periods and it's not very warm, then, we have the two of the three components that we need. We're just missing that third one to really, really, and that's not to say things are negative. It's just to really take advantage of the situation that we are being blessed with, especially out west. We really need to start getting some heat to come around to really push some of those crops. Not too much.
But not too much.
Not too much.
But just the amount of right.
Just like a porridge story I've heard in the past. But I mean, it's good. The weather in the central part of the state has been dang near perfect in the last couple weeks to really get things going and kick it off and really get growth coming. But out west, we got a little more time. Their season's just now starting, to get going. So they'll get it eventually. It's one of those things. We have all the pieces in play. We just need that heat to come on and kind of stay friendly for the time being.
So how does that impact the? I'm going to say a term that I don't necessarily know if that's the right one. The tasseling, the pollinating of the corn, the magic where the pollen falls from the down.
Where the magic happens?
Where the magic happens. Well, I remember early on you told me that there's like a 2-week magic period where that has to happen. And temperatures have to be just perfect. And
I don't know.
Before the fairy comes out and sprinkles all the magic dust upon the corn across Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, we were in Texas last week, and they were just now starting to tassel.
Yeah.
I don't think I haven't seen any corn tasseling yet here, but if North Texas is tasseling, that means we're close.
Yeah.
we're getting close. But they had a lot more rain early, so we're probably a little bit behind them. We're getting close to that time, especially some of the corn that got planted early that got blessed with some of that early rain that got up and got going. It's probably getting really close. Still in Jason, we were about chest to shoulder high on some of our corn here in Stillwater. So I mean, we're getting close. But you know, we still got some time. But yeah, I mean, these conditions would be perfect.
That's what I was asking.
Perfect for that. You know, we just 2 or 3 weeks from now, we still need the same conditions. So.
Well, and I mean, parts of the state haven't even hit 90 yet this year, and it makes it sound like I'm complaining. I am not complaining.
Not complaining.
But there are crops that need that, and corn may or may not be one of those, and that's why I was asking.
Well, I mean, everything needs a little bit of heat.
Right.
You know, as long as we got good. The best case scenarios is, well, I mean, it's kind of a funny thing because the best case scenarios typically when we're dry, and it's where we get these very warm days and these really cool nights.
Right.
When we get the humidity, we usually don't get those diurnal swings like we normally would, and so the nighttime temperatures stay up a little bit higher, and the daytime temperatures are kind of capped a little bit, so we get this kind of narrow range, which is still fine as long as the temperature's where it needs to be. But I mean, for corn and everything else, it's those nighttime temperatures that mean everything. Yeah. And so even if it gets to be 100 degrees, which we know it's going to happen at some point in time, as long as we stay out of the high 80s and low 90s during the evenings, things will take advantage of it.
That's when the pollen fairy shows up.
That's when the pollen fairy shows up. Yes, Dave.
That's how you explained it to me, so that's why that's the only terms I know.
We were on public TV. I couldn't explain it any other way, but yes, that's kind of what we need. But you can see some of our other crops that were planted a little bit later. There's some of our soybeans are really struggling to get going.
Yeah.
They're putting on trifoliates, but they're not getting the height that they've gotten years past, which for some of us that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes in a lot of our soybean crop, the issue was we're getting too much vegetative growth now when we have good conditions. That kind of like Jason and Amanda were talking about earlier with the wheat is that when we come to July and it's hot, we have to sustain these huge, I remember back in, I think it was 20, we had these 4.5 foot tall soybean plants, and then the drought hit, and it wasn't 2 weeks that those things died because it just has a lot of vegetative material it's got to hang on to, and we don't need that. So, having this moderate growth, is okay. There's nothing wrong with it, and getting it to get going as long as it's getting going is good.
Well put. Is good going while the get going's good is all good. So that's
all those things are within the realm of good.
I really need to work on that quote. I can see that as a bumper sticker.
It's too many words.
Yeah, it's very wordy, isn't it? Well, so I guess any advice for producers as they move into the summer with the crops?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's going to depend. There's, a lot of our fields out west for some of our summer crops are hinged on the fact of they either take their wheat to harvest or they don't take their wheat to harvest, and that's whether they'll plant a full season crop or a double crop or maybe no crop. And I think a lot more than not took it either to a late hay or are taking it all the way to grain. Part of the reason why I think that is because in April there was no good signs of saying, I'm going to terminate this crop that's already growing to plant a crop that I have no idea if it's going to have any moisture or not. So I think a lot of our western part will have to make that decision in the next couple weeks as wheat's starting to come out. We have moisture. It's maybe it's not even what double crop we go to, or not whether we go to a double crop or not, or it's what crop we go to. There's probably going to be a lot of consideration on forage sorghum because we are missing a lot of that hay reserves that we typically would like to have. We're hearing a lot of folks wanting to put in summer covers after a wheat crop, wanting to have a forage, to go into a wheat crop next year, and they're looking for options. And then, with prices, soybeans and grain sorghum and all that are a true possibility. So if we keep going in the West, get a couple of showers in the next couple of weeks, to let them get the wheat out. We need to get that wheat harvested, but still have that ground wet. I think we're going to see a lot of double crop potential acres coming in, just because the availability's there.
So, Jason, we are entering, or we're tiptoeing. I think we're jumping into an El Nino year, and those traditionally tend to be a little more wet. Is going fallow and just letting the land rest and rebuild the moisture profile, is that an option? Is that a good idea?
I mean, that's a kind of the business plan decision.
Yeah.
What's your business? If you're a cattle guy and you are looking to have some fall forage for stockers or anything, it might be prudent.
Yeah.
Because you're going to store that water, and you can see it in the wheat even this year. The stuff that was less intensively cropped over time is going to have a better wheat crop than the stuff that where they had beans in last year and they planted wheat into, because it had more to go on. And if you go through the summer and you have good moisture in the fall, you plant it early and you've got something to go on, then you might have some forage but otherwise, and then the further west you go, the more important that storage is. And so but if you're in central or eastern Oklahoma, it's a good idea to try to take advantage of it, because you're not going to keep it around, and it's soil depth differences and all that stuff. So like I say, I'm not going to fault anybody for doing anything,
right?
Because I'm just tickled to death that it's raining.
Yeah.
And it all depends on what your business plan is. But if you want to make grain, and you have the equipment to do soybeans or milo, it's at least an idea to think about utilizing or taking advantage of the El Nino. And again, I'm just so damn gun shy about this rain and the weather. And I look at the long-term weather history, and it's every 10 years. Every 10 years we have these dry spells now, and we had them in 12. We had them, last couple years. You look back to 2000, it was dry. You know what I mean? And so I'm hopeful that we're going back into a wet cycle. The guys in the Climate Center suggest we're going into a wet cycle. And so we need to have the gun loaded to take advantage of that, in my opinion. And it's fun. Like earlier today, I told Lofton I'd look into it, and I didn't quite get to look at all the data. But like on these summer crops, if you've had, 7, 8, 10 inches of rain in the last 30 days, you've made your first bushel. And every inch of rain on top of that 10 inches, say, will make 10 bushels of wheat, or not wheat, but like corn for sure, maybe 12 bushels, or 10 bushels of milo, and I'm not sure about the beans. So we are at the point of making grain. Does that make sense? If we have any soil water storage capacity, which a lot of our cropland anymore, because we've lost a lot of marginal ground. But if you've got good deep soil, you've got the first bushel in the bank, and then the rainfall from here on out is just going to make more bushels. So I'm excited, but again, I know it can turn south real quick. The heat can turn up, and the rain can turn off. So I always am cautious.
So something that me and you have talked about when we were talking about the cover crop things is a lot of folks that are coming out of wheat, maybe wanting to go into wheat in the fall, so they don't want to do a grain crop during the summer because it just doesn't work. And so they go to something that they can either graze on or hay or do something like that. So, we're talking about forage sorghums or cover crops.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot about there's some of these soils out here that can't store a tremendous amount of moisture. So if we have the moisture now, it's not going to be available in September. So you might as well grow a forage now.
Great.
So talk about, like, what are those soils that are those ones that can't store it? So you might as well, like you said, take advantage of this moisture.
And that's a great question, and it's more of an art than a science to answer it. But if you have shallow soils, meaning, if you try to dig a post hole, you're going to hit rock, then that's where I would target my summer forage post wheat harvest. And the reason that is and Alex Roccatelli is working on some of this, and I've looked at it. Tom Pieper, back in the day, he looked at summer forage production in continuous wheat systems. And generally what we see is that including that summer forage or cover crop is going to reduce the fall wheat forage production. It will not necessarily, and on average, won't affect the wheat grain yield. It'll just, in some years, it might make the wheat grain yield better. In some years, it might make it worse. But on average, the wheat grain yield doesn't get affected by the summer forage. It's the summer forage affecting the fall growth. And I don't know necessarily that is a water deal or a nutrient availability deal, whether it's nitrogen or whatever else. But the data says that harvesting wheat, planting a summer forage or cover, and then planting wheat into it will limit the growth of the fall wheat forage. And but if you look, like Tom Pieper did some great work, and it was just a simple summer millet hay program, and then he looked at fall forage production, and then he looked at spring hay production, and then grain. And what he found is that the spring hay production was not affected, the grain was not affected, but that fall forage was affected. So if you are and these were across like 5 locations in northwest Oklahoma, and I think he may see less of an effect if you were on these shallow, poor soils because they don't store the water, so you might as well get it while the getting's good, like the dunal sands along the rivers, if anybody's farming some of those, or shallow red bed soils. Go ahead and make your hay there. But if you've got a deep Port Silt loam or a Grant or a Pond Creek or something like that, which is like Pond Creek's up around Cherokee, the soil, not the town, but the Pond Creek Silt loam, or the any of these deep alluvial type soils, you might want to store water in them for the fall forage. In contrast, these shallow red beds, you might as well use it and get some value out of it because it's less likely to affect the wheat crop following that. And we don't have good data on it because as researchers, that's pretty hard to do, to find so many different, but we can look at the soil water holding capacity and say if it's 1 inch per foot, or in the top 4 feet we only have 5 inches of water storage versus the top feet having 15 inches of water storage, more 12 inches of water storage. Put the forage on the 5-inch water storage soil, utilize what you get during the growing season and what's there now, and then it's going to be a lot easier to recharge that in the fall. Does that make sense?
It does.
And that's anecdotally what I've seen over the years just working with growers, is those guys that have these poorer soils observe less negative impact on their wheat crop than the guys with big grain yield soils. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then it's the overall question of what's better, getting the forage when we know we have moisture, or waiting for that wheat to hope we get forage. That's such an interesting that's a difficult question to overcome. Is put hay in the barn, or assume that your wheat the next year is going to be a little bit better grazable.
Yeah, and there's guys, I could introduce you to people who they're always planting something. Yeah. And they're cattlemen or women or whatever, and they're always thinking about planting something and moving the cattle to where the forage is, or then utilizing it for hay or whatever. And it's a management system that's chaotic, but it's also thoughtful in that you can take advantage of the rain when it comes. You may not get a crop out of every seed you put in the ground, but hopefully you'll hit a sweet spot sooner or later, and you'll keep those cattle rolling through your system.
So Amanda, as we do have the rain, and we're looking back on this year in a utopia of a wheat crop for next year, what lessons have you learned from this year that could be applied to maybe a average year where we're not fighting drought? If everybody's prayers come true and it does continue to rain moving on through the summer and on into the fall, what's maybe some lessons that you've learned from this year and previous years that could be applied to, air quotes, a normal year?
what I would say, it's actually disease resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Because this year we had some leaf rust, septoria catching us by surprise, and we didn't manage for it.
Yeah.
So I think that would have been important, having the yield potential out there to protect. So having that genetic resistance to protect our yield potential, that would be my plan.
And that's a good point, because you can. There's only so much that you can manage for, and then there's a lot out there that you can select for, I guess.
Yeah, you can select for it. We have all those traits out there. We have our breeders working on it, and I think it's a very good tool to take advantage of. So that would be one that comes to my mind right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Amanda, thank you so much for setting in with us and putting up with these two. And sorry Brian wasn't here to
that guy
to chime in.
Brian.
Yeah, we missed you, Brian.
Wheat harvest.
I know. Jeez. Out cutting wheat between the rainstorms. You got to do what you got to do, I guess.
Yeah, I should be out there. I'm crunching data.
Yeah.
So producers know it's on the website if they're interested.
How often do you update the website?
Oh, it's as often
as it comes in.
I get the data, and I start working on it the same day or next day, depending on the time that we get the data back. But yeah, so as soon as we have the data, it's maybe a few days.
How many sites do you have across the state?
I think locations would have been maybe, I never know, but it would have been maybe 14.
Wow.
More than that. But experiments, I think this year we were about 37.
Wow.
Research experiments
and
around the state. Yeah.
I have like 6.
Yeah, it's
and that's not at every. That's not replicated at every site, is it?
Those are all replicated.
Wow.
Yeah. I think the only one that is not replicated is the demonstration strips that we have here in Stillwater. But all of those. So those are variety trials, but also research trials where we are looking at planting date, nutrient uptake, and things like that. Yeah. So this is it's a very busy time. And, so we are running everywhere, trying to collect biomass samples and harvest and do everything. And analyze data. So.
See, this is why I'm a summer crop guy, because when I'm doing this in October, it's a lot nicer outside.
Yeah, it is nice.
Yeah, it's hot. Yeah.
The nice thing about summers is if you can get summer crop planted before the end of May, in early June, and then you don't have to harvest it until it starts cooling down, it's pretty nice. But wheat harvest.
Oh, going down the canopy right now. Yeah. It's
like climbing into a combine to unplug it. It just sounds wonderful when it's 90 degrees.
And humidity of 90.
The good thing is we are all excited.
I'm probably going to have to do that here before long. I'll probably plug a combine. That's going to be my penance for that comment. I'll plug a combine, and then I'll be under it for 2 hours.
I was about to say, we've unplugged a combine in sleet before. I don't know which one's worse, 90 degrees or sleet.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well,
now you're excited. We're excited to see the data. So I think that overcomes it.
It's always nice to get the final result.
And thank you for listening in on this conversation of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. And if you'd like to join us in the next discussion, send us an email, podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, or send us a tweet. Our handle is reddirtag. And of course, head over to the Red Dirt Agronomy Facebook page so you can watch us record the next episode live. We would like to thank Dr. Amanda Silva for joining us on the podcast today. To find out more about her or any of our guests, along with any of the resources that we talked about today or on previous podcasts, visit reddirtagronomy.com. There you'll find show notes, and you can listen to past episodes too. For Dr. Josh Lofton, Dr. Jason Warren, and the absent because he was cutting wheat, Dr. Brian Arnell, I am Dave Deacon. And we all want to thank you for listening. The proceeding is a copyrighted recording of Agnow Media, LLC, 2023. And yes, all rights are reserved.